then Nick.
Yeah, I mean, just strikes me it's very difficult to make an assessment on value for money, given the complexity of the structure in place and the lack of transparency around Network Rail. So the report's saying we've got rising cost of new trains, lack of international benchmarks, higher financing costs, complex contract structure, and a flawed modelling and data shortages. So in terms of the transparency you have around Network Rail, are you satisfied you have all the information that you need?
As a regulator, I'm never satisfied with having all the information, and that's why we're pushing quite hard on taking on board the kind of recommendations.
What major areas of data do you not have at the moment?
It relates to ever-improving international benchmarking data with Network Rail to compare and contrast. And only last week we published our most recent report on how Network Rail compares with its European peers.
But you've been in post a number of years, have you not?
We have been.
You've been in existence.
We've been in existence for since the beginning, in a sense, and
previous that there was something else.
Can we go through just a few of the numbers then, because I was having trouble just working them out. The programme, the 9 billion improvement, 2/3 of that is borrowed money by Network Rail, is it?
a lot of that is Network Rails, yes.
Oh, 6.1 billion, I think, is borrowed, is it?
I think that's a
Yeah. Because the refinancing costs on that is it 800 million?
There is
right?
The cost of refinancing. Well, the annual cost of financing that level of debt, that's going to be a continual. Is what it will be. That's how it works on the
sure.
cost
I
of
mean,
capital.
the 8 million, I agree. The 8 million is just for the first 5 years.
Yes, yeah.
So presumably they'll be ongoing.
It's ongoing because, in fact, the capital costs of the enhancements are added to the Network Rail's regulatory asset base, and that is remunerated at the cost of capital based on all the best information we've got, and that follows on throughout. So we're buying those type of enhancements on the basis of these are investments for the long term that will be funded through access charges and network grant.
Sure,
on the
so
long
that will
term.
pass to their asset base. Yeah,
yes, and that's what happens.
There's quite a few. So what's the non-incremental infrastructure improvements? What's the refinancing around those? So if we weren't doing these improvements on which we're paying 800 million of financing costs, just for the status quo, what's the financing around those?
If it's just a change, a renewal of the existing assets, then that is covered through the normal maintenance charges in revenue through the actual. So it's a kind of pay as you go. If it's an enhancement, then it's in the capital exactly the same way. There's only two ways you can get the money.
Stop at the borrowing.
Yeah, I'm trying to drive out. Okay, let's look at it differently. I mean, what's Network Rail's current debt, and what is the refinancing costs around that at the moment?
Its current debt is in the 30 billion level. I haven't quite got the number in front of me,
Well, give or take a couple of billion, or
it's running at around about 5 or 6% of that return, 5% return on the regulated asset base.
Right. So what's the refinancing cost? What I'm driving at is, we had earlier in the response to Matt Hancock's question, well, if you give it more money to Network Rail, we can bring the ticket price down. What I'm just trying to establish is how much of the money we're giving is currently going in financing costs, and then perhaps we can come on to some of the press reports around management costs and consultancy costs and other things. But how much of it is going in refinancing costs? I mean, you're, with respect to the regulator, I assume you know what the refinancing costs are.
I haven't got the figures in front of me precisely of the numbers, and I can provide those for you quite happily as to what the refinancing costs or the return that we've incorporated in.
Because I mean, what just struck me as slightly odd was there's this document, Information Memorandum 2010, which talks about a 35 billion multi-currency note programme, and there's a further 4 billion of other notes on a different programme, and yet at page 26 it says the issuer, Network Rail, is permitted to incur debt outside the programme, included but not limited to bank debt, and it talks about the various banks who are involved in this: Merrill Lynch, Deutsche Bank, Morgan Stanley, Barclays, Capital Goldman Sachs, Citi, HSBC, UBS, Royal Bank of Scotland. None of those come cheap. So how does this committee get sight of how much of the money the taxpayer is giving each year to Network Rail, and the transparency over how much of that is going on refinancing costs, how much is it going to Mr. Coucher, who was paid significant sums, to any consultancies, to your costs. Your chairman's on 120 grand a week, I think, for a 3-day week. Whatever the chairman of Network Rail gets, there's been figures around $250,000 quoted for a 2-day week. And the elephant in the room has to be that the more complex a structure is, on the whole, the more expensive it's likely to be. And the report does cite that this is a unique structure. And at the heart of it, accountability, we're being told, is by individual members of Network Rail. Well, we're not sure that's that effective. So really, the accountability is being driven by yourself. And so, as the committee that's looking at this as a value for money issue, could I come back to the first question? This year, what will Network Rail pay in refinancing costs?
I haven't got the figure in front of me, but you might have.
One point, the figure that was published in the white paper showed for each of the 5 years not only what the taxpayer was putting in, but how much the passenger service would cost to run, what the baseline cost of the actions of Network Rail are in doing maintenance and operations, etc. And there was a third line that said Network Rail financing payments. So that's the cost annually of the, call it 30 billion of debt. Over the space of the 5 years, that was 8.4 billion was the projection. So that 8.4 is the cost of carrying the historic debt before you start the control period. And then when you borrow a further 6 billion, which is what we were planning, there's an additional financing charge, which is the 800 million that you mentioned earlier on.
Okay.
So those are the numbers in respect to the financing.
Fine. And in terms of moving on, because one can dwell on that, and that's covering all debt currently owed by Network Rail, is it?
I believe
Yes.
so.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's, do you have the interest rate? The average interest rate for that?